Okay, so today we are starting with chapter 2, and hopefully you talked about this in your C++ class, but there are 3 different types of errors that we'll get. And again, you probably have made syntax errors in C++, so you know what those are. Those are like you forget a semicolon, things aren't capitalized correctly. So if you're trying to use a method, but you're not using the right capitalization, so it doesn't know what you're talking about. So the computer doesn't understand you. That's a syntax error. A runtime error means that it ran, but it crashed at some point because of something that you did. Maybe you typed in a letter and you're supposed to type in a number, that kind of thing. And then we have logic errors. That's if you put the wrong calculation in, you'll get the wrong answer. So just because we have a calculation doesn't mean that we use the right order operations and it's correct. So we have to make sure that our output is reasonable for what we're trying to do. Okay, so that's our testing stage. Okay, so we talked about, comments. Hopefully you know how to do comments. They're the same as they are in C++. The / is a single line comment, and then a /*, and then an */ just stop as a multi-line comment. So we're going to do multiple lines. It's a little easier to use the multi-line. Have to. Okay. We have blocks of code. So the first block that you'll see is the body of it's called our class, right? And so you'll see public class, and that name will always be the same name as what you have for your file name, except without the .java. Okay, so those should match. Okay, and then we're always going to have a main method. So just like you have a main function in C++, you're going to have a main method. The main method looks pretty overwhelming in Java, I'm not going to lie. We don't have to know what all those words mean. We will when we talk about methods. But you do have to put public static void main, and then you have the string args, which we will really never use, but they have to be there. And then the body will be the curly brace, the starting curly brace in the end, and then everything we want to do right now till we get to separating them into separate methods will be in main, just like it was in C++ when you did C++. So that's your main. And main in Java doesn't return anything, so it is void, so you don't have to put return at the end. Actually, you don't want to put return 0 at the end because Java will understand you because it's not supposed to be returning, it's supposed to be void, so we'll get upset about that. So don't put that. The cout that you did in C++ is similar to our print line in Java. Actually, it's similar to the print in Java. Print ln is similar to a cout with an end l at the end. So like just to get a separate line. Print ln, which stands for print line, gives you a separate line. So if you keep doing that with each one, you'll get a separate line for each thing you're trying to print out. You can also use \n, which you talked about in C++ class, hopefully, which gives you an extra line, so you don't have to use the end l. Java doesn't have the end l, but it has the print ln. And if you want separate lines in your string throughout, you just use \n to get separate lines. So hopefully you remember that. Okay. Comments, we talked about that. We're starting off with just putting our comments at the beginning. It will get more important to put comments throughout as we get more challenging code, but right now we don't have our code isn't really that challenging, so we don't really need to put a comment line on each line of code. So we will have our class header at the top. You kind of get used to that. That is going to be different from what you did in your C++, but it should start with that. So if you're using NetBeans, which we are going to start using today, whenever you open a new project and you select Java file, it is going to start with a class that matches the name of the file for you, so you don't even have to do that. And it is going to have the main method, so all you have to do is worry about what to put in the main method, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the class and the main method and everything will make sense later. But hopefully, you knew that you needed a main in C++, we need a main in Java. That's what runs when we run our application. Okay. So main method, it has to be called main. Every application needs a main and only should have one main. Okay, and then the statements have semicolons at the end. So we did like this hello world, that's a statement. If we're doing like arithmetic, that's a statement. So when we're doing, output or we're doing calculations, those are statements. Whenever we have like a loop, for example, that's a block of code, or we have conditions that we're doing, those are blocks of code, or we have a class, that's a block of code, or a main method, methods are blocks of code. So we have the curly braces, those are blocks, and then the statements go inside that. Okay. All right, so you should know some of these from C++ as well. So that should all carry over. Okay, and it's a little different in Java. Again, we're not using cout, but we're using the system out print ln, and you'll kind of get used to that as we go. Out actually represents the monitor, and system is actually a class that's out there that you can look for. Okay, these are some of the escape sequences. Hopefully you learned this in C++, so this is review. So \n is new line. That's the main one I'm going to use in here. If you wanted to print like quotes, you can't put quotes inside a string because it'll think you want to end the string, not display a quote inside there. So you have to actually put backslash quotes, and that doesn't happen that often, but you know, every once in a while if you want. So you might look back at this. If you wanted to, you could hit spacebar a bunch of times to kind of line things up, but you can also use tab, which is backslash T, because if you hit tab inside a string, it doesn't work, but if you do backslash T. Okay. So just an example, like this one will leave an extra line. This one will leave a tab, so it's like hitting spacebar a couple times. This is a new line, and then spacebar a couple times, and then a new line, and then a tab to, you know, indent it. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay with that? And actually, you don't need to have separate prints for all of this. You actually could just continue the string up here, just take off the quotes here and the quotes here, and just continue on one line. Another thing that's nice about Java that you'll notice that's different from C++ is if you're going on one line, see, one thing that people hate doing when they're coding is like a line that goes forever out to the right that they have to scroll. So I know some people's monitors are really large, but programming for like a standard monitor, so most people, they don't have to scroll forever, because yes, you can go forever out to the right, but that's not cool to do that, to have to do that. So you want to break it. Now you don't have to do like separate prints for each one when you break it. You can actually stop your string with a quote and then put a plus sign and then join again with another quote and the next line. And you could put the plus sign on the previous line or the next line either. Don't put two. Don't put one on the previous line and one on the next line. You just need one plus between strings, okay? So the plus tells it, that's how we concatenate in Java, how we join. And so if we were, you know, ending a string, but we put a plus, then it joins it with the next string. So technically, I don't need to have this part. I could just start with a string here and take this part off and put a plus sign between those two. And then I wouldn't need to do that again. Not that it's bad, but it's just unnecessary. Okay. All right. You hopefully talked about variables in C++, so hopefully this is review. And one of the main variables that you have in Java, just like in C++, is int, which stands for integer, which means whole number. Okay, so just like in C++. So it's going to have a place in memory that it stores if you don't even know what that place is. But whenever you say int and you say a variable name, it's setting aside the storage for that variable, and it knows it's an integer, so it knows how large it's going to be. And then it knows it's that name. So when you refer to it later, it can reference that and pull that information from you. And you can change what's in there by saying the name equals and putting different data in there, as long as it's not a constant, right? Okay. And we can initialize it. It's always good to initialize. See, C++, do you know what initialize means? Give it a value. Did you hear that word before? So when you say that you're going to have int num, and you just put a semicolon, and then later in Java, if you try to print what num is, it gets upset because it says you never gave it a value. So it doesn't automatically default initialize things like C++. C++ doesn't, you know, it just kind of gives it a value for you. It just kind of handles things. But Java, it's like, no, you didn't give it a value, so I'm not printing anything because you didn't give it a value, which is kind of good because you should give it a value. You shouldn't try to print it when you didn't give it a value, I think. So just be careful because it will say it's not initialized, and that means you haven't given it a value. So it doesn't automatically default values to your variables for you. So you should always initialize and give it a value, or make sure that when it gets to that point, it has a value. You shouldn't be printing it without having a value. Okay, but you can definitely say like int num, and then put a calculation in later, and then when you do the output, by that point has a value. Like you don't have to always initialize if it's going to get a value later, but if it's not, you need to make sure it gets something. Okay. So I talked about this. You can concatenate. So you can concatenate two strings by putting a plus sign. It's just a fancy word. So it means join. So plus sign between them means join. You can also join. So I know this is a little different from in C++ because in C++, when you wanted to do a cout statement, you would do the two little arrows here, like to print the value or to print the variable. But you just put a plus sign in Java, but you don't use the two arrows. And so it's a little something to use to. You can also, in Java, whenever you put the plus signs, that's a good time to take it to the next line, okay? I like this, and not all editors do this, but NetBeans, if you have a really long paragraph and you hit enter in the middle of a string, it will actually end the string, put a plus sign, and rejoin it for you. Like it'll do that work for you, where you don't have to do it. So it does a lot of work for you. When you put like a starting curly brace, it'll put an ending, so it tries to fix. If you have a beginning parenthesis, it'll put an ending. It knows that you need that, so it puts it for you. It's kind of nice. So this is how we join. Like if we had a value, we want to join it with a string, or if we had a variable, we wanted to join it with a string, or we want to join two strings. This one, you can do like an escape code. You actually could just put this escape code right inside the string. I don't even know why you would do that. I would just put it right inside the string. Just seems like extra work, but it's showing you can keep joining as many times as you want. So you can join like string plus variable plus string plus, you can have like a max of thing, and there's no limit to what you can do with it. Okay, but so for your output, instead of doing like system out print line, you could really just put your string plus your variable plus your string, and then when you want, put \ends in it, and that gives you your enters, which is really nice when we start talking about message boxes, because you don't want to keep printing message boxes. Maybe put one massive message box, not massive, I shouldn't say massive, but \ends will get you enters in there, so it looks nice for like your graphical output instead of like separate message boxes for every single value. Okay. So you cannot do this because Java doesn't like it, even though you have the ending quote here that goes with this. It does not like it to span more than one line without having plus signs. So what you would need to do is you would need to put the quote here and a plus sign either on this line or on this line, but not both. And then put another quote to start and a quote here and a plus sign, and then a quote and a plus sign between each one. Okay. And then if you want them in your output to not be a massive line across, then you would need some \ends. Otherwise, you would have one massive line. Okay, even if it shows in your, you probably know this already from C++, but even if it shows that it's on multiple lines, here, your output doesn't look like that. It has to have the \ends. That's the only reason people do this in the output like this, is so it can read it on one screen, but then it does not affect your output. Just because you write it with enters and everything here doesn't mean it's going to look like that. Okay, so this is an example, and it doesn't matter if you put the plus here or you put it here, just don't put it in both places. Some people just get used to putting it on the line before or line after. It does not matter if you put a space here. It does, if you can jam it up against, but it does matter if you put a space here, because if you don't put a space here, it runs up into the A here, and that looks bad. So when you're testing your output, if two words are pushed together, you need to go put a space inside the quotes, because the spaces outside the quotes doesn't affect, right? Okay, everybody good on that? So you can see the similarities, but you can see the differences too with ours. Now we got plus signs, and we have like a system out print line, but the same rules where we put spaces and quotes, and that's all the same as what we had in C++. And we can't span multiple lines without putting some sort of way. We didn't have the arrows or to join it. Okay. All right, so this is just an example. You can put equations in your output if you want to. You don't have to put an equation and save in a variable, then print your variable in your output. If you're only using it one time, then you can really just put the equation right in your output. If you're using it multiple times, it's good to have a variable, because then you're going to use it in multiple places. You don't have to put the equation multiple times. If you're going to do addition, there's a problem with that, because the plus sign means join. That's the first thing it does. And so if you were actually to not put parentheses here, it would actually join 6 and 4 and get 64. Okay, so if it ever joins the two numbers, you know you forgot to put parentheses around it, because it only does that with addition. Like, it doesn't get confused with multiplication, division, modulus, because the symbols, but it gets confused with addition because it means join. Okay, everybody good? Okay. Identifiers have the same rules as they did in C++, so hopefully you were taught the rules. You don't want to start with a number, but you can have a number somewhere in there. Just have to start with a letter, okay? So you can name your variable rate1 and rate2, but you can't call it 1 rate, 2 rate, right? Now, if you want to write out the word 1, that's fine, but you just can't put the number to start with. You can't have spaces. You can absolutely not have spaces on anything you name in programming. Don't do that. If you don't like pushing words together, you can use an underscore, but you can't use a hyphen. You have to use an underscore. It makes more typing, so people don't typically do it. Most people like to have it short and sweet, and they don't want to put underscores because that makes extra work. So they usually push the words together. When you're doing variables, you want to start with a lowercase letter. Okay, now will it work if you start with a capital? Yes, but it's not common to do that because it confuses with classes and other things we have that are supposed to be capital. So it makes people confused with your code. So it's standard to start with a lowercase letter. Okay, now your first word should be lowercase, And the second word should start with a capital. And then if you have a third, which isn't common, if you have a third capital, and please try not to have a fourth. Okay, don't make it like a sentence, okay? Short and sweet and to the point, but not so short that we don't know what we're talking about, okay? To the point is important, because if you name all your variables X, Y, and Z, but you're talking about like rate and interest and, you know, time, then we can't equate which X, Y, and Z, like we don't know what they match up with. So if you really want to be sure, you can call it R and T and I, but let's just call it rate and time. Let's just call it so we know what it is. But you don't have to call it, this is my rate variable. Like we don't have to be excessive, because every time we type that, we have to rewrite that. And so we want to be short. So like items ordered is an example with a capitalization. It's kind of hard to read this, although with hashtags, I think everyone's getting kind of used to it. So maybe it's not a big deal. But capitalizing the first letter, it's called camelback casing, makes it easier to read. And so that's why we do that. Okay. But if we do it the camelback way, we need to, you probably know this, if you capitalize something, you need to stay with the same capitalization, because if you do it this way, one place in your code, and you try and do it this way, they're not connected. It's like two separate variable names. Okay. Very, very picky. These are the Java reserved words. So you probably heard about C++ reserved words. These are the Java reserved words. I've never had anyone want to name their variables those words. Like, that's just not something you would typically name your variable. But if it is, you can use those words as long as you put a number after it, or you put something after it. It's not just that word. So it's just confused, because if you put like int, then it thinks you want to create an integer. So like if you can't name a variable something that comes from here. Okay. They should be descriptive. So like TR, we're maybe not sure what that is, but it stands for tax rate, but maybe you want to call it, maybe we just call it tax rate if you think sales tax rate is too much, but tax rate is pretty, even rate, you know? So you have to think about what, but don't call it A. Okay, that's because that's really hard to figure out. But you know, we're talking like this is a double because it's a decimal. The two main variable types we're going to use in here are double and int. Okay, so you probably use the same ones, and you can make it a float to save space, but it's really not necessary most of the time. Double is the common, you know, what most people use. Unless it's imperative we save that little bit of space, then we usually just go with double. Okay. So we should begin with a lowercase letter, and then words after get capitalized, no spaces. When we start our class names, they should start with a capital letter. Okay, so classes start with a capital letter. So like your file name should start with a capital letter, but your variable name should start with a lowercase letter. Okay. Here's a list of the variable types. They should look very familiar from what you had in C++. Some of them are eliminated. Like we don't have some of the, we don't have long, and you know, like different, there were more in C++ actually. We are not going to use byte and short. We're actually not going to use long either, because we don't have numbers that big. I mean, it's nice to know it exists in case you run out of room with an int. We don't have numbers that large, so we don't need that. I'm really not going to focus on floats. Float and double are the two decimal numbers, but we're really just going to use double, because any decimal number, even if it's a small number like 0.5, is automatically by default a double, and then you have to actually worry about putting an F after it to make it a float, and it's kind of a pain, so we don't do it that much, but you can if you want to. And it doesn't, I mean, it saves room, but really that little bit of room doesn't really make a difference unless it's really, really important. So char, we're going to use a little bit later when we start like making decisions and such. We might use chars. That's just one character. As soon as you get more than one character, you want to go with a string. And string has different comparisons than a char. String is not on here because these are just the primitive variable types, and a string is actually an object. So in Java, a string is an object, so it's much more complicated because it has more than one character. So you have to examine each character, whereas a char is just the one character. So these are primitive, these are basic data types, and then object data types are more advanced. So we'll talk about those. Boolean we'll get to when we talk about decisions. So like true or false. You called it a bool in C++, now it's called a Boolean, but the same thing. Okay. Does anyone have questions? I'm not going to ask you to memorize this, but you should know like which one's bigger, an int or long, or which one's bigger, a float or a double. Or like if I asked you to see if somebody's age, which variable type would you use? Probably an int, right? Because I never had anyone answer with a decimal answer when I asked them their age. So it's not worth having a double, and it makes it so that we don't need it. If you don't need it and you absolutely know it's not going to happen, then go with int. If you're not sure if you're going to get a decimal, you always err on the side of caution and go with double. Okay? If it's possible to get a decimal number. Like how many pages are in a book? It's a page, whether it has just a little sentence at the top, it's still a page. You can't say that there's 15.2 pages in the book, so don't put decimal, don't put double. Okay, pretty good. All right. When you're declaring variables, same thing as in C++. If you know that they all have the same data type, you could go int x, semicolon, int y, semicolon, int z, but you can also put a comma between them. Kind of condenses it a bit. Okay, you can assign a value. Be careful, you can't put a double into an int. It's going to complain loss of precision because that's a decimal and you're trying to put it in an int. And so just make sure you're putting the right data types in there. Okay. You can, if you want to use float, you're going to have to put an f. It actually doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase f, but if you want to put a number, even if it's like 0.5, you have to put an f after it to assign it to a variable type float, because automatically 0.5 is a double, which sounds really strange, but automatically the computer represents integers as int and decimals as double. It just defaults, so you have to force it to be a float. So if you have an equation that has decimals in it, there has to be an f next to each number. So because once you get a double in there, it makes the whole thing a double and then it won't go in a float. So you have to make sure that it keeps that afloat. Okay. So just as an example of having these two variables, month and days, that are both integers. Here's the assignment. You could actually assign it up here and just put equals 2 and equals 28. But you can do it separately. It just takes up more room. So this is called the declaration, and this is the initialization, giving it values, and then just printing it out as output. Everybody with me? Okay. The value that you put in a variable, sometimes people call it a literal. I don't say it that much, but I'm trying to say it because you might see it on your exam. Because when we do the exam in this class, it's actually multiple teachers from multiple classes that made it up, and they may use that word an awful lot. So I try to say it more and more. So literal is the value you're putting in a variable. So that's the integer literal that goes in those variables. I'll just try to throw these words out there like initialization, declaration, literals. You may have heard them in your C++ class as well. Okay. So once you initialize, you can give a value, a different value later. Like you say month is 2, but later you could say month is something else, right? Okay. And then you could just put it all together. So that's what we were talking about before. You could say that the initialization with the declaration all in one line. Okay. Everybody good so far? Okay. You always have to make sure the order, like of course you can't try to print something before you declared it, right? You have to make sure the order, you probably hopefully did that in your C++ class. This is a problem in Java because you don't have any values. You did not initialize those. You did not give them any literals. It does not know what you're talking about. And so when you try to print them, it doesn't know what they are. So that is a problem in Java. Okay. You had hopefully already talked about these in C++. The only one that usually gives people trouble is division and modulus. Division because we have integer division, which you may remember that was a pain, right? Anytime you divide two integers, you get an integer. That was one of those things that happened that always shocked everybody that the equation came out with a different answer. And then modulus is the remainder one that you don't use quite as much. So like if you divide, what's the remainder? Okay, so integer division, 1 divided by 2 is 0, right? Because 1 is an integer, 2 is an integer. You do not get the decimal answer. Everybody with me? So normally it's 0.5, right? But it just chops the ending. It does not round, it chops. So it just erases it. So if it's point something, like if it's 0.5 and there's a 0 before the decimal, then you just get 0 because you just erase the decimal. Everybody with me? Okay. So that's not right. Okay. And you might say, why does it do that? Well, in some cases, it's actually good and helpful. Okay. So if you think you're giving someone change, right? And you want to know how many quarters to give somebody, and you have to give them, let's say you have 78 cents, but you have to give them how many quarters that would be. You have to figure out how many quarters that would be, but you don't want it to say 3 point something, right? Because you can't cut like a quarter into like a piece, right? So you just want it to say 3. And we don't want it to round because what if it happened to be closer to the next one and it rounded to 4? And now you're like, oh, that's wrong, and giving people extra change. So there are methods to round, but that doesn't round when you do integer division. And sometimes it works out exactly the way you want it to, like for a change program, which we will do in here. You actually will do it for your exercise. And then sometimes it doesn't do what you want it to do when you're trying. You just have to know that that is an issue. And you have to either change one of those numbers. If they're actual numbers like 1 and 2, You just change one of them to be decimal, like 1.0 or 2.0 or both. If they're variables, then you can change one of the variables to be a double instead of an int. Or we can do some casting, which we'll talk about. But everybody with me? But you have to know that that could be a problem. You probably talked about the precedence rules. So we have to do parentheses first. And if you have inner parentheses, you do those first. Then you handle all the parentheses. After you do the parentheses, then you're going to do the multiplication, division, and modulus, but you're going to go from left to right. So if you hit modulus first from left to right, you do that first. And if you hit multiplication, you do that, and then division. Once you solve all of that from left to right, then you go to addition and subtraction. So starting at left to right, solve those. Okay. The last thing you do is put the value back in the variable. Assign it to the variable. Okay. So if you look at this, parentheses get done first. So 20. Okay. And then this one, you would do this and get 3. And then this, you would do this after. And then you would subtract. Go with me? And then you would assign. Okay, so you would take the result and you would assign it to x. That's the very last thing you do. Okay, so if you kind of work through this, I should have rewrote the equation. But if you kind of work through this, you do parentheses first. So 1 plus 2 is 3. And then you go back to the left and work your way across. So you do any division, multiplication, modulus. So division would be first, right? So 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then you have 5 plus 3 times 4. So you take the 3 times 4, which you get 12. And then the 5 plus 12, and you get 17. I should have rewrote the equation, so it'll be a little bit easier to see. But I wrote it over here. And then the answer is the last thing. 17 goes into answer. Should we do that? But I have it on the right if you're interested. Okay. It just takes practice. Hopefully you did this in C++, so hopefully it's not completely new for you. It should be the same rules as you did there, but just kind of review. And I know that some people struggle with it in C++. Hopefully it makes sense. This is division. You can do it in your head or you can write it out long division. I try to keep the numbers fairly simple so that I'm not like tricking you with advanced numbers. But like when you're dividing 4 into 13, when you take 4 times 3 gives 12 and 13 minus 12 is 1. So there's 1 remaining. Everybody know how to do that? This is review, right? Okay. 6 divided by 2 divides evenly, so it's 0. This is a great way to check for divisibility. So if you want to know if a number is divisible by 2, you can do the modulus by 2 and see if it equals 0. Then you know that it's divisible or divisible by 3 or 4 or okay. This one you have to kind of solve. There's no parentheses. So you do the 45 modulus 6. When you divide 45 by 6, you actually are going to subtract the 2 to get a remainder of 3. So, you know, because you get 42 when you take 45 divided by 6, 45 minus 42, you get 3. Do you know how to do that? Okay. Okay. And then so you get 3 here in place of this. And then you do 3 times 5, you get 15. And then 15 modulus 2, because 2 goes into 15. And you get 1 left over, right? Everybody good? And so 1 is the answer, and 1 goes into y at the right end. Are y'all okay? Okay. Easy? Okay. All right, there's shorthand. It doesn't look like this would ever be useful because I picked really short variables. I should have picked longer names. But if the names were something like total or number, it would be a little bit shorter because you wouldn't have to rewrite the word and you're probably like, oh, that doesn't seem very short. It's completely the same whether you write it out or you write it short. But when you see other people's code and they do that, you should know what it does. So you should be like, oh, that's the shorthand version. And actually, after you do it, it's not that bad. Really, what you do is whatever. It has to be the same variable you're talking about. So if you're talking about the same variable, see how you have x and x here? If you're talking about like a different variable like z, it wouldn't work, right? It has to be the same variable repeating. So what you do is you take the variable that's repeating and you write that, and then you write the operator, and then you write equals, and then whatever you want to do it by. That's the shorthand word. You don't have to write x again. I know that's not a big deal because x is so easy to write. But if the variable name were longer, like sales tax rate or something, that would be a little bit less to write. You'll notice that programmers don't like to type that much. They like to shorten and condense things, and they think it's really cool when they do. So any shorthand way. And you will most likely, out of all of these, the most one you'll use is the plus plus, right? And you probably use that in C++. And I always tell my students, you know, there's C and then there's C++, but there's no C+, right? Because C++ is the next version of C. It means like the next version. So add 1 to it, replace it, and now it's the new version. Okay, so if you can kind of keep that in your mind, there is no, I don't know why it's plus plus, but there is no just one plus. And if you want to do it by 3, you don't put plus plus plus. Okay, there's a limit because we wouldn't want like 20 pluses hell. So plus plus means add 1 to it and replace it. You'll see that a lot when you do loops, right? You do like 4 loops. Hopefully you've done that. Okay. Okay. Constants, you know, in C++ you did CONST, but in Java you do final, but it's the same idea. So if you make a variable constant, normally people will capitalize every letter of so you know it's a constant. Do you have to? No, but you should. It's like the convention to do that. So that this, and because you capitalize every letter, if it's more than one word, typically you'll put an underscore so you can see the difference between the words. And then you'll put a final on there so it doesn't change, right? Okay. String is an object. So we talked about this. It's not a primitive type. There's actually a whole chapter in your book about strings. So we'll learn some basics. But you might think it's weird because in C++ string wasn't capitalized, but in Java it is. And if you don't capitalize it, when you're creating a variable, like let's say you want to create a variable named message, and you want it to be a string, you have to put string with a capital S. And the reason is because string is actually a class and it's actually creating a string object, which we'll talk about later. But if you go out there, there's a whole file of all the wonderful things you can do with string. And so string actually is what we call a class and it's creating an object. And I know it's quite weird because we haven't talked about objects, but for now we just have to know string gets a capital S because it's a class, it's actually creating an object. So that's all you have to know. It won't work if you put lowercase s. Okay, so here's an example. If you want a variable that has the word hello in it, you cannot put lowercase s here. It won't work. You have to put capital S for string. This is a longhand way anytime you're doing objects, but typically people don't do that. We'll talk about the difference between those two, but it's really a shortcut to not have to write equals new string because strings are so common that really there's a shortcut for it. Okay. You can also say the name of the string.length and it'll tell you how many characters are in that. That includes spaces and punctuation, anything in your string. All right, we talked about this already, but the only one we didn't talk about is JavaDoc, and that's going to come into play later. We'll do that whenever we start doing more methods and everything. We're not going to really do it now. But if you put Java documentation, if you ever see /**, and then you put something in there, typically when you do methods, if you do that, what'll happen is it'll tell you like the description of the method, and they'll tell you like what parameters you have for the method, what return type you have for the method, and that's a great way to know what methods you have in there. So it's a way to document your code for someone so that they can look at the Java documentation and say, oh, this method does this. I need this information for this method. I get this information back. And so it's documentation. They don't have to go read the comments. It'll be in the nice HTML document for them. I'll show you the Java docs later in this class, but we don't have to worry about that right now. For right now, you just need the other two that you learned. Okay. We don't need to do that, but it does create an HTML file. You can just say generate JavaDoc and it'll create it, but we don't have the JavaDoc. Like, we're not going to do that for every file right now, so it's not going to generate anything really. But that's what it looks like. And so it's pretty cool because we will start going out there and looking at the Java documentation. Usually I don't do that till we start talking about methods because methods is where we have to start looking at parameters and return types. And that's really what we're looking at. So what different methods can we use? And so that's when I start looking at the Java docs. Okay. So there's 2 ways to do input that we're going to do in this class. We're going to do something called scanner, which is very simple, similar to what you did in C++, where you do like cin, a little more complicated in Java, but cin, basically. It's like in your output box down at the bottom, it's just your command line, okay? So you do output with the print line, you do, you know, basically your cin, we're going to do through scanner. You do have to create a scanner object, which I'll show you the code for it. But once you do that, you can use any of these methods. The methods are here. You do have to capitalize them correctly. So methods all start with a lowercase letter. So that's why it looks kind of strange to get used to, but they start with a lowercase, and if they're multiple words, they have a capital as the second. They don't, these methods don't require any data from you, so they're all empty parentheses, okay? So if you're taking in a double, you use next double. If you're taking in an int, next int. So it's pretty easy. The one thing I love about NetBeans that I don't love about online GDB and all those is when you type the name of the scanner object that you create and you hit period, it'll pop up with all the options. You don't have to remember what it is. So I'm gonna say like, oh, which, and you just double click on next int because you might think it's next integer and you have to go look at like the PowerPoint slider, but when you're in NetBeans, it'll say it's next int, so you don't have to like remember that. So it's kind of nice. Okay. I don't like memorizing. I think the more you do it, the better you get. You'll automatically know it. But why not let it help you while you're doing it? Like you don't have to remember if it's next int or next integer. So Okay, so here's an example of a program. To use the scanner, you have to put this import. So remember in C++ you use preprocessors at the top with like IO stream and everything. Well, in Java, we use something called imports. Now, we didn't have to do it for the system out print line because it's a very basic import. It's called Java lang, and it's automatically default. So they like, everybody uses this, so we're just going to automatically import it, okay? But as we get more and more code that we go away from that, we have to start putting our imports at the top. They have to go before your class. Doesn't matter to me if they go before your comments or after, but has to go before your class. It doesn't matter to me when you get more than one what order you put them in. If you want to put them alphabetically or most used to least used, it doesn't matter to me. But you put the word import, all lowercase, and then you put what's called the package. So basically you have to say, where is this file located? This is a file, it's called a class. Okay, so scanner file is located inside this folder, inside this folder. We'll talk more about that later, but that's basically telling Java where that's located. Okay, so you don't need to put this unless you want to. That tells you it's for the scanner class. And then inside here, when you first use a scanner, you have to put scanner and you have to give it a name. This is a variable name, so it follows the variable naming rules, but it can be any name you want. I typically call it keyboard or input. Whatever name you want is fine. But when you're using scanner, you only have to create one scanner object and you just keep reusing that scanner object. You don't have to create it more than one time. You just do it one time. You tell Java what's the name. What does it use? It uses system in, which is the keyboard. Okay. Now, just like in C++, when you were doing input, you always told the user what they're inputting because having a blank cursor down there blinking wouldn't be very helpful. It's like kind of having like a test and having a blank line, but you don't know what to type there. Like it always says name and then it has a blank line, right? So you know you're supposed to put your name there. So like, what are you asking them for? Type that in as a system out print line and then take in the data, right? So tell them what you want, enter your age. I put a colon here because I think it looks nice because it says like something is to come. Some people put like little carrots. I don't, it doesn't matter. Like basically it's what looks good to you. And then once you do that, like you do a cin and C++ and you have to have a variable to store it in, right? You have to do the same thing here. You can do it all as one line or you could have created this up above. But basically this side is whatever name you created up here. So I called it keyboard, so I call it keyboard here. You have to use that scanner. And then whatever method you want to use. This is the part that I was saying is nice in NetBeans because if you type keyboard dot, it'll come up with a list and you don't have to remember. You just know you want an integer, so you pick next int. Okay. Now, if you just do keyboard dot next int and you don't put it in a variable, it'll float off into space and you won't have it. Okay. So don't do that because that's a waste. But I always tell students that's like asking someone, what's your age? And you go, la, 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 la. Why did I ask if I wasn't going to save it in memory? So if you're going to ask for them to give you their age, then save it in memory. Like don't cover your ears, okay? Save it in memory means give it a variable so you can use it later, okay? So you have to, this variable type should match this, whatever you're using over here for the method. So like if you're taking an int, this should be an int, right? Okay, and this name should make sense with whatever you're doing, okay? And then I just printed it back out here. Does that make sense to everybody? So far, so good? Yeah. Yeah, it's an object, which we didn't get to. Java, unfortunately, can't do anything without objects. And so it's very hard because we don't talk about objects till chapter 6 and like and what they are in more detail. So the most I could tell you is every time you see that keyword new there, you're creating an object. So objects are complicated because they have a bunch of properties and things that go with them. We're going to create many of them in the future. But right now, just to get like standard input, we have to still use them, unfortunately. And so there's no way to just do this without this. So for now, if you just know, this has to look like this except for this word. And this is the variable name for the object. Like all objects have a name that goes with them. And when you say keyboard, it knows that it's coming from the keyboard because it says system in. I called it keyboard. It could be whatever name you want. Java doesn't care what name. You could call it I or K, so you don't have to type it again as much. But as far as like understanding objects, the complexity of them right now, we're going to talk about it in depth later. But I know that's one bad thing about Java. That's why you don't start with it in your first class. It's because there's no way to get around objects. And some things we have to ignore, like that whole public static void main. And we have to kind of like just have a general idea. But I promise you by the end of this class, every word in the code will make sense and it'll all click. But some explanation might not make sense till we talk about objects. It's very frustrating though. It frustrates me when I don't understand every little piece, but it's frustrating because you have to understand some of this before you can understand, and it's like, yeah. Okay. So again, this is really a preference thing. You can put a colon, you can put that. Sometimes you'll see people put that. It's just what shows up here. That kind of looks like greater than, so maybe I don't like that as much, but you get the idea. That's for, down at the bottom. And if you don't type anything down there in the bottom, if you don't actually click down there and type, your program will stay running forever and it will never stop until you type something or you like exit out. So I have students that have like written me, they're like, I can't run it again because it's grayed out. And I'm like, is it running right now? Oh yeah, you have to type down there and hit enter or we'll keep, or they'll tell me it says enter a number, but it never did anything else. And I'm like, well, did you enter a number? No, I didn't. And so that's what you have to go down there and click enter a number or it won't proceed. Like it'll stay on that line and it won't let you run it again because it's waiting for you to enter a number. So just be careful. If you don't click down in the output box down at the bottom in NetBeans and actually type something and hit enter, it won't do the next thing. And if you don't type another number and hit enter, it'll stay there. So you'll have to exit out. So this is just an example of the same thing. The imports, the scanner, I just called it the same thing so it wouldn't be confusing. And then here you can see that enter a number and it uses the keyboard for the next int and it saves it in number 1. But then you can see I do enter another number. I'm still using that same keyboard, so I didn't have to do another scanner. Now, it wouldn't hurt you to do another scanner object with a different name, but it's just kind of wasted space. If you don't need it, you can just reuse the scanner object. So you can say keyboard and then say keyboard again and take in whatever data you want here. And then you have to have one for number 1, number 1 for number 2, and then you can add them, for example, put in the answer and display the answer. Are y'all with me? Okay. So we can also use J-option panes. I really like J-option panes. They're a little more graphical. They look a little different on Mac and Windows, but it's still just a message box that pops up on the screen, but sometimes the format of it's a little different. So the nice thing about J-option pane is you don't have to create an object, which is really strange because I can actually see this and it looks like an object and Scanner does not, and it is. You never know, right? Objects can be very abstract in Java, so sometimes they're hard to understand, but you'll understand more later about what's an object and what's not. But this, you don't need an object. So what I mean by that is we don't have to say like J-option pane, give it a name equals new J-option pane like we did for Scanner. But there's always downsides to everything, right? Advantages and disadvantages, because if there was only advantages, we would just use this, right? The disadvantage is everything comes back as a string. So like when you use this, see this part here, J-option pane is the name of a class. It's a file out there. This is the name, I can't get my cursor to work. This is the name of a method, show input dialog. The input dialog has a little text box for you to type your information. So you have to do it exactly like that though. Show has to be all lowercase, input with, and you have to spell everything correctly or it doesn't work. And then in here, this part is where you put your parameters. So it means this first parameter is always going to be null. Do you know what that word null means? Have you heard that before? It means basically like not applicable, like I'm skipping this, like nothing kind of. So the question is, what's the parent component? And there is no parent component that this is attached to. You can attach GUIs to other GUIs, graphical user interfaces to other ones, but we're not attaching it, so it's not attached. So if you wanted to just display in the center of the monitor and not be attached to anything, you put the answer null. Java doesn't like it when you skip questions though. Like if it wants to know the parent component, you just skip it, it gets upset. So null is a way to kind of just say, no, I just want the default, but let's just move on. So like that's the answer to the question. And then the second question is, what's the message you want to display here? Exactly how you want it to look. So if you wanted a little colon here, you can put a colon, whatever you want inside quotes, okay? You tell the user what they're supposed to be typing, okay? Now, the problem with this is whenever this data comes back, this automatically sends back. So this show input dialog automatically gives you the input that they type in, but it gives it to you as a string. Have y'all talked about the difference between, like, can you use strings and calculations? No, right? They're a pain. Sometimes you want a string. Like if you're asking for someone's name, that's perfect, right? Because that is a string, it saves a string. But if you're asking someone for like the Fahrenheit, if it comes back as a string, you have to save it as a string. So you have to come up with a variable name for it. But then you can't use it in an equation. So you have to change it to be a number data type, not a string data type. So otherwise it'll say you can't use it. You can't just put, you might say, what happens if I just put double here? Like, why do I have to put string there? you don't have that option. Like with the scanner, you get to pick what data type you want it to be returned as because there's different methods, but there's not different options to return as like a double or an int. It just returns as a string and it says convert it if you want it to be something else. Strings can be converted to any number type. Okay, y'all with me? It's just a little extra work, okay? So with not having to create an object comes a little extra work of having to convert the number if you want a number. So to convert a number, all you do is use this method called parse double if you want a decimal. So the parse double is in a class or in a file called double. So it's double.parse double. If you want an integer, it's integer.parseInt. I do not know why they did it because it's so frustrating. It's not integer.parseInteger, which you would think, and students do it and it doesn't work. This is where NetBeans helps because if you say integer dot, find it in the list, and parse integer is not one of them. So parse int, I don't know why they did it. They just write out the word integer. So, and then in parentheses, it's what you want to parse. So like parse means convert. So like this string variable from up here, this response, will get converted to a decimal, a double, and then you have to save it. So anytime you're doing like a conversion, it's giving you back the converted version. You have to save it or you lose it because it's like that, la, 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 la. I'm going to put it in a memory because if I don't, and Java will let you put this line on a line by itself, but it will actually give you a little light bulb next to it in NetBeans that says, basically, this isn't very useful. It doesn't say that, but that's basically what it's saying. It says like, you're doing this, but you're not using it. Like you're not saving it. So would you like to create a variable to save it or you could put, one thing you can do is anytime something returns, you can put it into like another method or do something. But if you don't use it somehow, like put it in another method or put it in a calculation or save it in a variable, you lose it, okay? So you have to do something with it. If it's returning information for you and you're not doing anything with it, then you're losing anything. So you're doing all that work for nothing, okay? It's like doing a calculation, but not putting in an output, not putting it in a variable. So it's like doing it on your calculator and then just turning it off. It's like, why did you do all that work, right? You still don't know the answer. Okay, so save it in a variable. The reason why I didn't use the nice variable Fahrenheit up here is because you can't use the same variable name. Like if I use Fahrenheit up there for string, I can't use Fahrenheit again. Some people will call it like Fahrenheit string or something if you want, but I usually just give it a generic thing because it'll be converted anyways, like response or input or something generic, temporary, something. And then this is the variable name I want to use in my equation. So that's the one that I do. And it could have been FAH if you don't want to type out Fahrenheit, or F if you want to stay really short. Okay. In order to use JOptionPane, there's an import you need to put at the top of your program. Memorizing these imports, you don't need to do that. You can just look at, so I tell students, I think some students, like they get stressed because they think, I don't know this very well because I don't have it memorized. No, don't memorize it. So what I want you to do is look at like the exercises you're doing to do the assignment. You should be able to look at them. You shouldn't have it memorized and be able to do the assignment without looking at anything. That doesn't mean you don't know it. That's just crazy to expect you to memorize the import for JOptionPane only having typed it one time, okay? For me to expect you to memorize that, that would be crazy. So yeah, go back to your exercise and look at the import that you use for JOptionPane. You probably will never have a JOptionPane and a scanner import at the top of your program, because if you choose to use scanner, you're going to do like input and output through command line and you're not going to use JOptionPane. I don't want you to mix match it. Like I don't want you to have input through command line and then output through message box, or have input through message box and output through command line. Just stay consistent. If you're going to use command line, use command line. So really you shouldn't have both of them. If you're going to use message box, use message box. I didn't show you the output yet, but there's an output one. I usually give you a choice, an assignment, say use JOptionPane or scanner. Really doesn't matter to me. Some people like the command line. Some people like the graphical. You get to pick, but just stick with one. Don't like mix match it. Don't have some things going on in your command line and some popping up all over the place. Okay, everybody good with this? Okay, so here's an example of output. The difference in output is you'll notice it says show message instead of input. You don't get a little place to type, okay? If you're doing output, don't use the input box because that's confusing. Like you think you're supposed to type something and really you're not asking for information. So make sure you use message. You still put null here because it's still asking about the parent component and it's not attached. Then the output would be in here just like you would put in a system out print line. Just put the same thing right there for the output. Like if you want on separate lines, you have to put \n. If you're running off your page, like I'm running off the PowerPoint side, here. So I didn't put it here. I put it over here. You can do that on the screen too. Just try to break at pluses. That's a great place to break in your code. Don't break in the middle of a word, like in the middle of a string. You can break like after the word and it'll automatically join it, but don't break in the middle of the word Celsius or something. Like just either put it on one line or the next line. Okay. That just looks weird. Now you'll notice that it doesn't have a variable to save it into. The reason is because this show message dialog doesn't return anything. So you hopefully talked about functions in C++, whether they return or don't return. So everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say it doesn't return. It's not asking for information from you. It's just showing the result, just like when you're printing something to the screen. Like when you're doing input in C++, cin gives you something, right? Cout doesn't, right? So output message box doesn't give you anything because it's just output. And so it doesn't need, or it shouldn't have a variable. It would be confused if you put one because it doesn't have anything to save to it. Okay, so you don't put a variable there. Everybody good? Okay, so here's what it looks like. So we have the input, the import, sorry, for Xiaoqinping. Okay, so I want to explain this. See how this says enter a number and it's the input box and it's saved in response? I could have put string response here, but I actually convert it here and save it in number one. Then I do the same thing here for another number. I use response again. See how I use the same variable? I cannot put string response and then put string response again because Java, if you declare a variable more than one time, it gets upset, right? If you want to call it like string response 1 and string response 2, you can. But because it's a temporary variable that's getting converted and then you're not using it again, I just replaced it. I just said, like, instead of creating another variable, I just replaced it. Does it bother me if you create another one? No. Just make sure whatever you use that in here. Like if you use a response 2, use it in here. And then this line is exactly the same line as the previous program. And then this is exactly the same as the output from the other one, except it's in a message box. Okay. Are y'all okay so far? Okay. And then, so this is what it looks like. So you enter your number, another number, and you get the output. Okay. You should try to, and sometimes I forget, so you'll have to remind me. It's not a huge deal, but you should, if you're using Xiaoqinping, try to put system.exit after you use it, because it could keep running in the background. If you didn't close out any of your Xiaoqinpings, they could keep running, like that thread could keep running and it uses up. So try to, if you forget, it's not the end of the world. I forget sometimes, so you can remind me. But it's just something that would be more proper to do. Okay. So it looks like this. So try to remember that, and I sometimes forget. Okay, so you may notice if you do output that you can get a really long 16-digit decimal number when you are doing decimals, and that's not preferable, especially if we're trying to output the cost of something that just looks awkward. So there are ways to format this. So your book teaches you a different way, and if you want to use that, that's fine. I actually prefer this way. I think it's a little easier. You can pick which way you like. I posted a document of how to do it in Canvas, so you can use the way your book has, or you can use this way, whichever way you think works better for you. So what I like to do is I like to use two different ones. So number format does currency. It's really easy to use. So you need to put this import at the top for it, and it's called number format. And then there's another one called decimal format. Okay, so the number format one actually does create a formatting object, and it does go based off a pattern that already exists, which is a little confusing, but if you just follow this line right here, but change this name to be whatever you want it to be. That's actually object name. So currency formatter can be whatever you want it to be. You probably don't want to call it format because there's the name of the method is called format. But you know, you can call it like 2 decimal pattern or something, but you can't start with the number 2. You have to write out the word 2, or pattern 2 decimals maybe, or what, you know, or currency. Since you're doing currency, currency is fine. You don't have to write currency formatter, currency pattern, whatever works. Okay, so I called it currency formatter. So whatever you call it here, whenever you're doing output, now it doesn't matter if you're doing it in like the system out print line, which is the command line, or you're doing it in an output box. It would be the same. You would copy and paste it the same way. So whenever you want to display that number, so if we had the number 20.5, we would use whatever name we used up here, And then we would say dot format. Format's the method. So the name of method is always format. So dot format. And then whatever you want to format goes in parentheses. Now, here I have a number, but I could put a variable in there just as easy. Okay, a variable that has a number. And then it'll format that variable or that number to be what is the currency version. So it has the $sign, it has a decimal 2 places. It does round. So if it's you know, a long decimal, it should be rounded up, it'll round it up. It also put commas in there, like if you have a really big number. So makes it look more like currency. So it just makes it look nicer. So again, all you have to do is put the import at the top. Do this line here if you want to use currency format, or you can use that, and then just put whatever name you give it up here, dot format, and then the parentheses. And again, that can go right in the J option pane as well as the scanner. Okay, but that works for currency. But if you're talking about like Fahrenheit, don't use this one, right? Because that would be odd for it to have the $sign. So everybody with me? So what if you're doing something like Fahrenheit or something like that that's not a currency? Okay, so actually I like the decimal formatter if you don't even remember the number formatter, because you can make your own pattern and just put the $sign in, so you don't really need the number formatter if it's challenging. It's just kind of a shortcut for like currency, but you can really use this one for currency as well if you just want to remember this one. So you put this import at the top for decimal format, and then this is just saying I have a variable 212.5, that the name of the variable is Fahrenheit. And then I put this line here, okay? So this is creating a pattern formatter object. And again, there's lots of objects in Java, sorry. It will make all sense as we go through it. But decimal format is the name of the class. Pattern formatter is the name I gave it. That could be any variable name you want. Could have just called it P for pattern if I want to stay nice and simple. And then new equals new decimal format creates the object. You have to put the pattern in parentheses, okay? Inside quotes. So if you wanted to have a $sign, you could actually just put a $sign here, okay? If you wanted to have commas, you put the comma in there. If you don't, leave the comma out. So the difference between the $sign and the zeros is the zeros are required. If you don't have a number there, put a 0 in its place. The signs only display if there's a number there. So it's not common to put zeros before the decimal, except maybe 1 before the decimal. Because like if you had the number 0.5 and you didn't put a 0 before the decimal, it would just be decimal 0.5, not 0.5. But if you, it depends on if you want that 0. But you wouldn't want to keep putting zeros because you want like 0.5, like it would just look weird. But after the decimal, you can also use $signs. Some people are very picky about their decimals. They want all of their decimals to have 2 numbers, whether they're there or not. So even if I had the number 6, it would be 6.00. Like when I did my dissertation, all numbers had to have 2 decimals. If there weren't, I had to add zeros, right? But then some people are like, don't put the 0 if there's no number there, right? So it just depends on who you're talking to and what you're doing. And it's not important to me. If I say 2 decimals, $signs, zeros, if there's numbers, there should be 2 decimals. If they're not, it doesn't matter to me if they're displayed or not displayed. So I'm not that picky with that. You can pick. But does that make sense? The $sign versus the zeros. You don't have to, it will never eliminate integers. Okay, so let's say that I have a billion. It'll display a billion. The only thing that this is telling it is really the decimals. So you don't have to carry out the $signs to the left for a billion, you know, for that places, because it won't delete them. The only reason why I carried it out to put the comma, and it will continue that pattern. So let's say you had a billion, it'll know to continue the comma pattern for all the numbers, like every 3 places gets a comma. You're just teaching it the 3 places, comma, 3 places, comma, but it never eliminates. So like you can have a billion or a trillion, you know, whatever. Okay, everybody with me? Okay. But we don't have numbers that big, so we don't have to worry, but okay. So so these quotes are wrong because I typed them in PowerPoint. So that's what happens when you type things in PowerPoint. You get the fancy quotes. Okay, they're supposed to come from Notepad. So this quote is supposed to go this way to close the temperature is, and that is not right. These are not regular like coding quotes. They're like the fancy ones. So I have to fix that. You can't type code into PowerPoint because it won't look like this. It'll look like this, and it won't do it the right way. So, okay. This name will be the same name you use up here, just like the currency one that I showed you. And then you'll say format. It's the same method for this one as the other one. And then whatever you want to format. So if it happens to be a variable, the variable will go in there. If it happens to be a number, the number will go in there. And then it'll format it right in place of this. So it'll say like the temperature is, because it has that string first. And then it'll do the formatting version of that. And because it has 2 zeros at the end, even though it only has 1 decimal number after it puts the 0 after it. But if I put $signs instead of zeros at the end, it would just say 0.5. It wouldn't say, but it will round. So if you do have like a 16-digit decimal number and you're asking it for 2 decimal places, it will look at that number to round it, so to round it. Okay, so it's nice so you don't get these really long decimal numbers, but this is the way I like to do it. I like this one. I think it's easy. It works for any type of output, whether it's a graphical or whether it's command line, but your book is going to teach a little different, so you pick which way works for you as long as it works. Yes?
So I'm sort of confused when you said, you want 0.05 or 0.5, and will we use this kind of, decimal format, pattern formatter when we know the number, or what if it's like a calculation? Would you use this?
Yeah. So it can be like yeah, you won't know the number probably. It'll probably be a variable that has the number in it, and it probably be like input from the user, so you won't know what the number is. But let's say you want to have that 2 decimal places as the output, then you just train it based on the pattern you put to have 2 decimals. It's just a matter of whether you want your 2 decimals, like do you want this to be 5.50 or do you just want it to be 5? Like if there's numbers, let's say your decimal place, you have 16 decimal number. If you say 2 decimal places, whether you use 0, 0 or pound sign, it doesn't matter in that case because there's numbers there. So it will look exactly the same. It's only when there's not numbers, it tells it whether to display one or not. And if you had a number like 0.5 and you didn't have a whole number before it, it was just 0.5, you would, if you want the 0.5, you would put a 0 here instead of a pound sign. Some people like it and some people don't. Like some people just put 0.5 and 0.5. Everybody's different. And some people don't like when it says, 0.50, like, just like 0.5 would be good. So really it's up to you whether you want zeros or pound signs. But if you have numbers in those places, then zeros versus pound signs look exactly the same. The output looks exactly. So it's kind of playing around and seeing what you think looks nice with it. And then you can add some of the extra ones too. I don't have the $ in there, but you can put the $ in there too, just before you can also use the currency one, but if you don't want to remember both of them, this one works for both cases. Okay. All right, so you don't have to use that. You can use the way your book has if you want to, but it's just an option. I like that way, and you'll see me use that way. I'll show you, both. But what I want you to do now is type in NetBeans down the bottom in the search, and it should bring you up to NetBeans. I got it installed the other day, so we should be good. Did y'all find it in the search? Okay. So you have a couple options of creating a new project. You have the option right here. You have the option up here, this little icon. If you hover over it, I believe it tells you new project. Or you can go to File, New Project. Any of those ways will work. You just need a new project. You can't do a new file. So one of the things about NetBeans is it works with projects. And each project is going to have a file that has a main method in it. So if you're doing another program, you have to do another project. Each program you do has another project. Now, when we get to the more advanced code, our programs will start having multiple files, and NetBeans are really nice because it'll keep them contained. For right now, we only have one file per program, so it seems a little bit of a pain to have separate projects for each one, but it will get nicer as we get more advanced, and it's helpful. But just know that you're going to have a separate project for each one. Okay, it's a little confusing because there's all these options of different types of Java. As some students says, I tried to get started, but I didn't know which one to choose. So click on the one Java with Ant. We're going to use that for the whole class. And then Java application. And it might be grayed out for now. The first time you go through and enable it, it won't after that. It shouldn't after that. Okay. And if it does, we'll just have to keep enabling it. But okay, click next. Now here I want you to pause because this is very important and I want to explain something. So there are a couple things, there are 3 things I want to talk about here. The project name is just a folder name. It doesn't really matter. It's just a folder name. I'm not even collecting the project name, I'm just collecting the Java files. So really, I won't know what you call the folder name, okay? Whether you capitalize it, don't capitalize it, I really won't know, okay? But I'm gonna see, to keep it easier for you, like let's call this adding scanner, because we're gonna do the scanner with adding with this simple example. Okay, don't put spaces in your project names. And then don't click finish chat, just wait a second, okay? So this is the folder name, okay? This is very important. Click browse here. I know that normally you don't have to pay attention to this because you can save it later, but NetBeans is kind of a pain because it has a project with everything in it, and to move the location later is a little bit of a pain. So if you would just pay attention to this when you first create it and put it in the place you want, then you don't have to worry about moving it later, okay? So if you have a flash drive, this would be where you would select flash drive or desktop or wherever you're saving your files, okay? So I'm going to put desktop. It automatically defaults to NetBeans projects under documents, I think. So I don't want it to go there. Okay, I'm going to put it on my desktop, but you can put it on your flash drive if you have one. Okay, then down here, I want to explain this. Do you see how it says create main class? Okay, do you see how it has a name that's all lowercase, and then it has a period, and then it has a name that's the same name with capital letters that matches our project up above? Okay, it's a little tricky. Okay, so here's the thing. That lowercase that's before the period is what's called a package. And it makes our life more difficult for now because we haven't talked about packages. So to make your life a little easier, we're going to eliminate that package, because if you don't eliminate that package, it puts a package line in your code and it makes it confusing, and I don't want to deal with it right now. Later we can deal with it, so I just want you to erase that. But I want you to erase the one before the period, not the one after. Okay, the lowercase one, because that's the package one. Okay. Yes, yes, I want you to erase the period. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a default package, which makes our life a little easier for now, but later, once you know what it is, you can decide whether you want it or don't want it. Okay, but for now, I don't want it because it's just a pain. Okay, so really, we're going to make our main class and our project name the same name. They don't have to match, because one's just a folder and one is actually the file name. The file name is the important one because that's what your class is going to be named. The project folder, that's to help you know what it is and you can find it. So I want your main class, which is your file name, to follow the rules of naming a class. It has to start with a capital letter, and every word after it has to have a capital letter. That's why I wanted you to erase the one that was all lowercase, because that's the package. So erase the period and everything before it. Does everybody do that? So it should say adding scanner. Okay, because scanner, because we're going to do command line. You can put command line. Okay. I try and stay descriptive in what I'm doing, not just like exercise 1 or 2. So I remember what it is that I'm doing. This is very small print. Let me see if I can change that. You don't have to do this because you can probably read yours on your screen, but that's very small probably for you to see. So I'm going to step it up a bit. That's probably really big, but that's okay. Okay. I'm going blind, so I need it. I don't know. Can you see that in the back? Is that better? Okay. Yeah, you can click finish after that. And it should look like this. And so getting used to NetBeans is takes a little bit, but then after you get it, hopefully it won't be too bad. So let me just show you something. So up here, there's a little tab. See it? If I click X, then it disappears. You're like, oh, where'd my project go? Well, it's still over here. Do you see it in the projects? It's this Java file right here. So if you double click, it comes back. Okay, so no worries. Okay. Now, if you accidentally close some of these panes here, you actually have window up here. You can get them back. Like if you close this project pane here, if you just click on this project here, go to window if you accidentally close some of your windows, and that should get all your windows back. So if you lose windows, they're up in window. Okay. All right. It's a little bit like overwhelming at first, but it does help us a lot, and hopefully you'll appreciate later. Okay. So we know that these are comments, and we actually don't need those, so we can just erase them. In NetBeans, the comments are gray unless you change the settings. There are a way to go to the settings and change the color coding. If you don't like gray, you could change it to something else. There's a different color scheme. We're going to erase all the comments. So this comment, and then this one that tells me to put my code here. I don't want that. That can all go away. So that's our basic shell. Okay. Now, whether you have extra space here or you want to condense it, that's up to you. Okay. But this shell looks like what we did in online GDB, except you should see that the nice thing about this is we can change this to whatever we want and it matches the file up here. Okay. Now, if you run it, nothing's going to happen because there's no code in there. But if we wanted to type our code, we want to type, what I want to do is a very basic, like type in a number, add it to another number, and then print the answer. Okay, like we were doing in the slide. So if we're doing scanner up here, and I'm going to go ahead and put my name up here. So if you go ahead and put your comments, go ahead and put your name and today's date. And then I want to show you something. We'll say like add 2 numbers from user and print result. Okay. I want to show you the JDK version, where to find that. So if you actually go up here in the menu to help and you click about, it's going to be the same all semester because I'm not updating it. If you go to help and about, it actually will show you the Java version right here. I don't care about the NetBeans version. Like this is the NetBeans version. I care about the Java. So actually we got a new version of the JDK. We're on 22. This other number doesn't really matter. They're always updating that, but like the main version is 22. So actually you can just put 22 here and it'll stay like that all semester. You might have a different version at home. but they just did it, so more than likely you'll probably get 22. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, we're not using anything in 22. So I don't even know what's, I need to go look at 22. Okay. I haven't been using 22, so that's kind of cool. Let's see what's new in there. All right, everybody good? As you go, you'll notice that the tab up here is bold. So you can just do Control S to save. When you run your program, it automatically saves. So should be good. If you try to close NetBeans, it should ask you if you want to save. But just to be safe, every so many lines, just do Control S and you'll be good. Don't do file save and put the file somewhere else because NetBeans has this whole project structure. And the file, the Java file has to be in an SRC folder inside the project or it doesn't work. So if you pull the Java file outside the folder, it no longer will work in NetBeans. You have to be careful with that. You don't save it somewhere else, that you leave it. So if you just do Control S, it'll save it where it's supposed to be. So it'll all work the way it's supposed to work. Okay, so what we need to do in order to use scanner is we need to put an import at the top. So we're going to say import. Okay, we're going to say java.util.scanner. So it's actually trying to help you, but it's a little overwhelming sometimes. But hopefully you'll find it helpful because it's saying, oh, what package would you like to, or what class would you like to use in that package? And it's like, that's a little much. But as you type, you can see, and if you want to just actually click on scanner, you can. You just double click and then you don't have to type it. So it kind of saves you. NetBeans is trying to help you, but whenever you type in an import and you haven't used it yet, it'll have a little yellow underline that says you haven't used it, but I haven't gotten that far yet. If by the end of your program, it still has a yellow underline, you could probably delete it because you haven't used it. But if you're not done with your code, don't worry about the yellow. Yellow is just like a suggestion. It's like telling you, hey, you haven't used this. Red is what I'm really worried about. Okay, red's bad. Yellow, pay attention to, but I'm not done, so I'm not worried about it. Okay, so then I'm going to go inside my main method. And this is, in order to use scanner, I have to create a scanner. Now, I could do my system out print line to tell the user what to enter, then create a scanner. But I usually just do the scanner at the top, just because it's get it out of the way. So we do scanner with a capital S for the scanner class. And then you can call it, K for keyboard. If you want to stay simple, call it keyboard, call it input. I'm just trying to call it something different so you know you can change it. Equals new scanner system.in. Okay. And that creates our scanner object and the name is K. Okay, we're pretty good. All right. Then we can do a system out print that tells the user what to type in. So system.out.print. One thing that you'll notice, I think it's, I kind of forget the shortcut because it's been a little bit. There's a shortcut for that. I'll figure it out in just a second. As out, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I know it's a shortcut because I get tired of typing cut. Okay. All right. So you can use, I like print whenever I'm doing scanner, when I'm doing command line, because print line will jump it to the next line. The cursor will be on the next line and I like it on the same line. It's really up to you. I'll show you the difference. But I want to say enter a number. Okay. But this doesn't actually take it in yet. This is just getting ready to enter a number, telling the user what the directions are. But I didn't actually take it in yet. Then the next line, we need to take in the data. So we need to have a variable to save it into. So when the user types the number, where does it go? If you're going to work with integers, which is fine, we can do integers and we can do decimals later. We can do like num1 for number 1 equals. And then you can do, what's the name of the scanner object? Does anybody remember? Okay, good. So K dot, and then you see how it's trying to help you. So hopefully you don't forget what the names are. So I want the integer one, so next int. So hopefully that's helpful. A little overwhelming, but also helpful. Okay, you will see that my scanner, because I created a scanner, my little yellow underline under the scanner import went away. But now you see that I have a little yellow one under number 1, and it tells me anytime you hover over the little underlines, it should pop up with a message that tells you see what's going on. So it says you haven't used that yet. I haven't gotten there yet, so I'm not worried about it. But if I'm all the way at the end and it still says that, then I can be concerned. Okay, so now I have a number. Okay, and I probably want to do Control S to save. And I probably want to test to see what's going on so far. So like, okay, I asked them to enter a number. I'm supposed to take in a number. Does it actually work? It's not going to print it out or anything. But if I run it, this little green run button, you should get a little output box here that says enter a number. And do you see how this is where the point where, students don't know what to do? This is where it says it's running. and it won't let you run it again because it's already running. You have to click down here and you have to enter a number. And this is the difference between doing a print and a print line. Do you see how my print puts it on the same line? If you did print LN, it would be on the next line with a cursor. It doesn't really matter, but whichever you like better. So just enter any number you want. Make it an integer, not a decimal. Like 3 and hit enter. And you see how it stopped running? It didn't do anything with that number, but you're just testing to make sure it works. Does it work? Ready with me? Okay. You okay with not being so far? Not too bad. Okay. I like it because it's helpful, because watch this. That wouldn't happen in online GDB. Okay. It's like, maybe I'm not there yet. Like maybe I didn't type the semicolon, but if I were to do this, I would want to know that there's a problem with that line. And I hover over it, it says, hey, you need a semicolon. Don't move on yet. Okay. So I like that. Another thing I like is you can click on these curly braces and it's kind of hard to see on the projector, but you can see on yours, they turn like a lime green color. You can see that this one goes with this. Watch if I have an extra one. See how it's red? It's like, nope. Or if I accidentally delete one, it's like, what's going on? This one matches this one, but where's the other one for this one? It's if they're ever red or you have underlines with them, you have too many or not enough. It also tries to, you can't really see it on a projector, but there's little dots here that line up too. That's kind of nice. It lines up your different curly braces. Okay. Everybody good so far? Okay. So we don't need the scanner again to do it. I'm going to copy these 2 lines. So if you just highlight them and Control-C or right-click copy and paste. I'm going to change it to enter another number, so it's a little different. So we need another number. And I can use the same part here, except I don't want it to be num1. That would just replace what I had for the other one. Plus it's upset with me because it's like, you already declared a num1. You can't declare it again. I can replace it, but I can't declare it again. But I want that to be num2. I'll just change that name. Okay. So now I should be able to get 2 numbers if I run it. And if I run it, watch how it saves automatically. It'll turn so it's not bold. And so I enter a number, enter another number, make sure that my spacing and everything looks good. And when I hit enter, it should stop the second time. Everybody good? Okay, so now I want to add those 2 numbers together and I want to print the answer. So I'm going to make a line that's going to have an integer of answer. And I'm going to add num1 plus num2. By the way, I think you know this from C++, but it doesn't matter if you put spaces between like your plus sign and your variable, or you jam it all together. It doesn't matter if you put it before and after your equals. If you want to run it together, if it takes extra time to hit spacebar, you don't have to. I like to separate, so I think it's a little easier to read, but you don't have to. See how the underlines, yellow underlines went away for num1 and num2 now, but now it's under answer. It tells me that I haven't used it yet. It's just trying to warn you as you go. And then you can pay attention to those yellow ones later. Okay, and then I want to print the answer. So I'm going to use the system out print line this time to print the answer. And I think, what is it? S out and tab. There we go. S out and tab. Like C out, S out, and tab. And it does it for you, so you don't have to type it if you get tired of typing that. Now, what I want to do for this one, I actually don't want quotes. I want to type in the number, like the first number, which is number 1. And then this looks really strange. But I want to join it with the plus sign. And then I want to join it, oops. I'll get this. I want to join it with the other number. And then I want to join it with the equals. So it's like an equation. And then I want to join it with the answer. Oh. My spacing right here. Got it. Okay. And you might want to put spaces here if you want spaces, or just this. Okay. Okay, and see how it looks if it works. Again, if you run it, it should save it. So you shouldn't have to keep saving, but you can if you want. So 4 and 5 gives me 9, right? It's kind of small up here, but I can make that bigger. Does that work for everybody? Try different numbers, test it, make sure it works. Does your output look good? Does it work? Is NetBeans okay to use? Are you okay with it? I want to show you a little bit more with NetBeans just so you feel a little more comfortable. That was just scanner, so we'll practice the option key next time, but and formatting. We have the next class to practice all of this again. But what I want to do is make sure everybody's comfortable with NetBeans. So I already told you if you close this Java file, that you can still get it back if it's, if it's open over here. And then if you mess up your windows somehow, you can get them back over here with the windows. So if you can change the way this looks, like you can minimize these if you like, if you want more space here. So they actually will just like, if you hover over it here, you click on it, you can get that back. So you can just like change the way this looks if you want. I like them over here sometimes when I want to focus more on my code. It's really up to you, but you can just click on it to get it back. Okay, this red line always irritates everyone. That is the print line. So if you were to print your code, which we really don't do very often, if we were to print our code and it goes past that red line, any characters that go past that red line will be on the next page. So I would say try to keep your code within the print line in case you wanted to print it. If you go a couple characters over, it's not a big deal. But if you try to stay within it, but again, printing is not something we typically do. So it doesn't bother me if it goes over the red line. Okay. What else do I want to talk to you about? I want to talk to you about closing and reopening this. So when you have your projects, and I can put that back on there if that helps everyone, you have this little coffee cup. You can collapse it and you can expand it. So if you have like 50 projects, you can collapse them when you're not using them and you can expand it over here. They'll always be under source packages though. And because we didn't put a package, it says default package. If you put a package, it would say the name of the package, like the one I told you didn't have to put. But the other thing that irritates me, not just the name on the folder, because I don't think that's that bad, is it actually adds a package line in your code. And then students accidentally delete it and then the whole thing doesn't work. So that's why I didn't want to deal with it. It's not that it just changes the folder, because that doesn't matter to me. It's the package line that it adds. We'll worry about later. Okay, so you can collapse these. But let's say that you wanted to close this. You can actually just right-click close, because if you don't ever close them, even if you close down NetBeans and you reopen, it'll still be there. Like they stay open forever. So I've had students come into me with like 50 projects open because they don't know how to close them. I'm like, we should probably close some of these. So that's where I kind of work with, closing that. And then if you want to reopen it, how do you open it? You just go to File, Open Project. Remember, you're not opening files. You have to open the whole project. And then wherever you saved it, you should see the little coffee cup. Okay, and then it should open. If it doesn't open your Java file automatically, you have to go to source packages, default package, and then double click on the Java file to open it. And you can have multiple projects and you can have the files from those multiple projects open so you can have them side by side and you can switch the views on here. Once you get better with it, you can play with it. So you can switch the views to see like the code at the same time. Okay, so really hopefully you'll play around with it a bit to get used to it. I want to show you that because it's on my desktop. So I want to show you where the actual, oh yeah, it's on the desktop over here though. Let me get it. I'll bring it over there for you. Okay. Here is my file on my desktop. This is my NetBeans project folder. So if I go inside here, notice that there's an SRC folder and then there's the Java file. That's what I need from you is the Java file. I don't want you to pull it out of that folder because then it will work in NetBeans, but I don't need the whole project folder because that takes time to zip it and upload it and then me to unzip it. And I really just need the Java file because I'm just going to look at that Java code and paste it in. I'm not really going to download your whole project folder. So when you're turning something in for me, like exercises or you're turning in your assignments, I really just need the Java files. So you don't have to pull them out from here and put them somewhere. You shouldn't do that. But when you're in Canvas and you're trying to submit them, just go to the location of your project folder, go inside the SRC, and then click on that Java file for me. And that's how you'll submit to me. Okay. So that's why it doesn't matter if you use Eclipse. I really won't know, except when you do the checkpoints in here, I'll know because we don't have Eclipse on these machines. Okay, so you have to know how to do the basics in NetBeans so you can get through the checkpoints. Everybody with me? Okay, so you know how to close and open projects and find your files. Good? Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. Stop this.